Hey, good morning, everybody. I'm thinking this is working. I was having some issues with my computer. My computer just froze up and I lost the live chat. So I have no idea. I can't read the chat, so I have no idea if I'm live or not. Um, so I don't know because my computer froze. Anyway, I'm going to assume I'm going to assume that this is working. I'm playing around with stuff here. So you can't even tell me because chat isn't working on my computer, but it looks like it's working. So I'm going to go ahead and just assume that we are on. Looks like there are some people who are on and my timer is working. So I have no idea. Don't you hate this? I'm going to check. I think I might not be plugged in. You know what? Somebody could text me at 484-547-1581. Tell me if this is working. I have no idea. Everything froze up. And let me check one more thing. All right, I have no idea. So I'm just going to pretend that it's working. My image keeps freezing on my computer. So I'm going to go for it, pretend it's working. So for those of you who were plugged in on Sunday, whether you were here or watching on YouTube on Sunday, if you remember at the end of the message, okay, I got a text. Okay, great. Thank you, Ann. I'm glad to know it's working. So I'm just going to pretend what I'm seeing keeps freezing and I have no chat whatsoever. So anyway, at the end of the message on Sunday, and I do have my coffee, by the way. Ann asked if I had, or no, somebody's asking if I have coffee. Yep. So at the end of the message on Sunday, I started that sentence about 5 times now, right? We talked about the RAF pilots, Royal Air Force pilots in Britain who were burned, and we talked about how important mirrors became to them. And that whole thing led to a study. And the reason I was holding up this guy, Quasimodo from the Hunchback of Notre Dame, that led to a study, that whole issue of doctors treating scars, et cetera, treating men who had the scars from the burns from their planes, led to a study in Britain of 11,000 prison inmates, men who, all of them were men in this case, all of them were men who committed crimes against people. In other words, it wasn't burglary, stealing a car or whatever, although I guess we could argue that all crimes are crimes against people. But specifically, these are crimes against people. And in this study, they took a look at the general population, at normal people who had not committed crimes against people, and they found that, generally speaking, in the population at large, about 20% of the population have some kind of facial deformity. Now, they by facial deformity, they're talking about something that you would notice in a person. It doesn't mean that your face has to be horribly deformed, but it could be. They looked for things like acne scars, a birthmark. You might have a misshapen nose, or a nose that people think is too big, or uh, maybe an issue with the chin or another scar on your face. In other words, any kind of mark on your face that you would see. Maybe the kind of thing that, if you're kids, you're going to joke about. It does not mean that a person's face was terribly misshapen or deformed, but just something that was recognizable. And they said about 20% of the population has some kind of a facial issue like that. So then they looked at 11,000 prison inmates, and they discovered that in English prisons, British prisons, that 60% of the British population had some kind of a facial deformity. And they called this the Quasimodo complex, named after the Hunchback of Notre Dame, the Quasimodo complex. And they went further in this, and then they repeated this study in the US, by the way. They found roughly the same results in the United States. And they surmised that very often we human beings, we get our image, our self-image, our understanding of who we are from what other people mirror back to us, starting at a very young age. We pick up who we are. And for a while, actually, in Britain, this led to a program. I'm not sure if this was in the States or not, but this led to a program in which when a person first was arrested for any kind of a crime, if they had some kind of a facial deformity in Britain, they offered, surgeons offered to correct that for free, hoping that what they could do is stop that person from being a repeat offender and having his crimes escalate to the point that he would commit violent crimes. And it was somewhat successful, but obviously, as you guys all know, taxpayers, there's no way taxpayers are going to fund that kind of stuff, right or wrong. That's not a judgment. It's just the fact that that's the way we taxpayers typically respond to that kind of thing. So those programs were all ended and never carried through. But it was very interesting that what they discovered was the fact that men who committed crimes against other people had a significantly higher percentage of some kind of facial deformities. And of course, they interviewed all these people and, talked about, when you were kids, were you made fun of, et cetera, et cetera. But they surmised, and of course, it's hard to prove this scientifically, they surmised that a lot of these people were carrying a lot of anger and ugly baggage based on how they were treated when they were young, based on their looks, based on their image, the looks, what was mirrored back to them. And I started thinking about this and processing this, and I'm not alone in this. But when you start thinking about it, did you ever realize how many of our bad guys in our stories, we make them ugly? I was a fan when I was a kid. I would read the Dick Tracy comic strips all the time in the paper. And Dick Tracy's, the bad guys, always had some kind of a facial deformity. I remember Prune Face, a guy that had a face that was all wrinkled up. Think about the bad guys that we know in some Batman, for example. Batman. Do you know that in Batman, the character that was originally meant to be his arch rival was Joker, of course. And Joker was a character who had his face deformed in I believe it was a chemical accident when he was young, and his face was twisted into that permanent smile, and his face was ugly. Think about Freddy Krueger, Jabba the Hutt, for those of you who are Star Wars fans. I remember The Matrix. I liked the original Matrix. I didn't really follow through with all the other Matrix movies, but I do remember one of them. I don't remember which one it was. But they had the twins. The bad guys were twins, and they had what looked to be albino features. Captain Hook in Peter Pan. Captain Hook, of course, who is the inspiration for Captain Hook, comes from Moby Dick, Captain Ahab. Captain Ahab lost a leg. Captain Hook lost a hand. So you have these two characters who have had, in essence, amputations, and they're bad guys. In the movie The Lion King, you have Scar, who has a scar across his face, and he's the bad guy. Witches, well, we tell stories about witches. Witches are always the ones who, they're ugly and they have warts growing on their noses and they look like, mean women. I was pondering this. I mean, of course, this is not universally true, but very often the bad guys in our stories are ugly. Of course, then you have Beauty and the Beast, and the whole point of that story is that the Beast is ugly. And of course, everybody recognizes him as a nasty person. And the whole point of the story is that ugly can be transformed and become beautiful. But ugly in that story is seen as evil. I thought about the stories that I used to tell my kids. I used to make up stories all the time. I tell stories at bedtime. And if I wanted a mean character, if I wanted some character to be mean, the way that I would make that character look mean is to think up something twisted about that character, some way of portraying that he was mean. And you remember, I know there was, sadly, there was a time in probably most cultures, but our culture, and I would guess most of them, when circuses collected human beings who had some kind of a deformity, and they were our circus freaks. And I remember the Elephant Man, if you remember the story about the Elephant Man, the true story, really the only option for him, the only livelihood for him as a young man was to become a circus freak, where people would pay money to look at him. And we push those people kind of out of society. And all that to say that one of the things that comes out of this is the idea that we just naturally equate beauty with goodness and ugliness with evil. We simply do it. And the problem that creates is that what do we do when we human beings aren't beautiful? My neighbor, an older guy, we've been here 22 years, so they were quote old and retired when we moved here, and they're both struggling. And he jokes with me. He talks about the fact that as he gets older, his body is growing barnacles. And he often, when we stand outside and talk, he laments the fact that with age comes a decline in physical beauty. Or think about, the reason I brought up Captain Hook and Captain Ahab is, you think about the people, young kids or whoever, who end up with some kind of an amputation. And so they have a very physical deformity, a very physical issue with their body. So all of these things with human beings, when we equate beauty with goodness and ugliness with evil, what it does for anybody who's struggling with any kind of an issue, any kind of a problem, is we create a situation where people judge any deformity, any issue with badness. And we assume that beauty equals goodness. And we simply know that that's not true, but that's what we do. And that image is just so important. So I think one of the things, all that to say that I think one of the things, those of us who are followers of Jesus Christ, when we start thinking about how we are as human beings, that this is something that comes almost naturally to us, is something that you and I need to work hard to resist, not only in ourselves, but especially the way we deal with other people, with other human beings. Mother Teresa used to, she had a reputation of dealing with the world's poorest and frankly, with lepers in India, who are often among the world's most deformed and ugliest people based on what had happened to their bodies. And Mother Teresa would often say, when people would talk to her and ask about how difficult it must be to love people who were so broken, she said it wasn't difficult at all. And she said, I pray every day that I would see the face of Jesus in every person I met, regardless of their physical beauty. And that's such a good prayer for us, especially in light of what I'm trying to think about and work on, just thinking about, the image of God in us. Who are we as human beings? That all of us as human beings are bearers of the image of God. And it would be such a good thing for us to remember to pray that we see the face of Jesus in every human being that we meet. Some just very practical things that you can do. And this has been something that not only that I've been working on, but something I've been noticing, especially because of this whole mask stuff, that we're just so disconnected right now. And so we need to go out of our way, I think, to be connecting with human beings. So a couple of things you can do. One is just look people in the eye, especially when you're meeting people. Just look people in the eye and say hello and smile. You smile with your eyes. I forget what that's called anymore, but you can smile in such a way that you smile with your eyes. It's been funny. I have to be careful about this, but I have a neighbor who is moving into a new house in our neighborhood. And when I first saw him moving in a couple weeks ago, I walked over and introduced myself, and he didn't appear to be particularly friendly. And so I made it a habit that whenever I see him, I go out of my way to say hello and to wave, to walk across the street. It's not directly across the street, but to walk across the street and go over to his house and say hello. And it's amazing to me how many times I'll get out of my car and wave, and he'll look at me and not respond at all. And I was saying something to Donna a week ago, and I was saying, Scott and I got out of the car, and both of us looked over and we both waved, and he looked up, didn't say a word. And I said, maybe he's not hearing me or whatever. And Donna said, you are not going to give up on this guy, are you? And I said, no, I am not. And it's just interesting to me how sad people are and what it is that they're carrying around, and I have no idea. But you and I can go through life recognizing that not only do you and I bear the image of God, but so does every person we meet. And regardless of a person's looks, we should, be careful about the fact that beauty and goodness do not necessarily go hand in hand, and evil and ugliness do not go hand in hand. But that every person we meet is an image bearer, and it might be horribly misshapen. And I'm talking about values and character. It'd be horribly misshapen by sin, but it's still there. So look people in the eye, smile, say hello, treat people kindly, and pray the prayer of Mother Teresa, that prayer that in every person we meet, we learn to see the face of Jesus. So, again, I'm hoping this worked. I don't know. I'm having all kinds of issues. I keep freezing and seeing just this unmoving face staring back at me, and my chat's gone. So who knows? But let me pray. Regardless of whether hearing this or not, God is. So let me pray. God, thanks for your goodness. Thank you for your faithfulness. Thank you, God, for this truth that we all bear your image in us, which isn't so much about how we look, but it's about who we are. God, we human beings really are captivated by looks. There is so much that we evaluate based on how a person looks. And God, I know that in some ways we've really done a lot of damage to human beings. We have communicated to people that their value is based on their looks. And we've communicated to beautiful people that that's why they're valuable, because of their beauty. We've communicated to people who are less than beautiful that their value is not that great, and that maybe they're a person who should just kind of be a wallflower. God, we regret and we express our sorrow for how we've treated other human beings based on looks. God, I pray that you'd help us to understand and to live every day with that idea that every human being with whom we lock eyes, all of us are image bearers. God, I pray that you'd help us to treat people kindly, to look people in the eye, to smile, to say hello, and to regard people highly as your creatures. I pray, God, that those of us who are struggling ourselves with our own issues of image, pray, God, that you would be working in our souls and in our hearts, reminding us of who we are as your children. And I pray, God, that you'd be present in our lives this day. And I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. All righty, everybody. Okay, great. Thank you, Phyllis. So I was just assuming it was working. So love you all. And hope you guys have a good day, and hope I can figure this out. So tomorrow, I know what I'm looking at. We'll see you tomorrow.